One of my earliest memories comes from when I was just a few years old. This probably gives a good idea of my actual age, but it was around 2000 or 2001. I don't really know what prompted it, but I remember my father hooking up an old Sega Genesis to a TV in his home office. I don't know why he was hooking up a Genesis, but what I do know about the console itself is that it wasn't mine. It was my sister's, and it had been sitting in the garage for years and years, though I didn't know that at the time. All I know is that my dad appeared with this weird cardboard box filled with this weird piece of machinery filled with all these cords. But let's be honest here, it doesn't matter why my dad was hooking up a Sega Genesis years after it was discontinued to an old TV inside his home office. What matters is what happened once it turned on. There was only one game for the Sega Genesis that my family had, and as I've later found out from my sister, it was the only game she ever bothered to get for it, and it was the game that came with it. And that was Sonic the Hedgehog, the very first game in the series, and I was gripped by it from a young age. Green Hill Zone, with its bright colors and energetic music and tropical trees and badniks to bounce on, was really something quite stimulating for my young mind. And I'm not sure if it was on that first time it was hooked up or on an occasion afterwards, but I remember beating Green Hill Zone. I remember making it to Dr. Robotnik at the end of it and beating him eventually. And I remember that was the first time, not only the first time I remember ever playing a video game, but the first time I ever remember succeeding at something in a video game, having that sense of accomplishment. I knew that my actions were causing this little blue thing zipping around the screen that was apparently a hedgehog to do something. And that something in this case was destroying robots. And that satisfaction when I finally got that stage clear screen, which I couldn't read because I was just that young, was satisfying. What was less satisfying was when I made it past Green Hill Zone finally, to Marble Zone. And I don't quite remember why, but when it came to Marble Zone, I was so bored I would always reset the console. So what does this tell you about my first game experience? Sonic the Hedgehog 1, a game that clearly left enough of an impact on me as a person that I'm talking about it to you right now, and I've done countless videos on this series, and that, let's be honest here, I'm a person that could be described as a Sonic fan. But also, it was clearly something that was flawed. After all, if I made it to what was only the second zone and felt compelled to reset the console, clearly not everything was perfect. So today we're doing something a little different. We're going to be taking a look at Sonic the Hedgehog, the very first one. I've looked at the Game Gear game before, but today we're taking a look at the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive version. And I'm going to be taking more of a personal look at it and deciding, is Sonic 1 still good? So welcome to Stuff We Play, home of everything weird and retro, and if that sounds cool to you, why not subscribe? And today we're talking about the first game I ever played, Sonic the Hedgehog. What's there to say about this game? Well, there's countless good things that can be said. I'll be honest, I heard the Green Hill theme so many times as a kid, from either playing it that initial time and eventually playing it again via methods such as the Sonic Mega Collection or the various other re-releases the game had, such as on the 3DS, the Xbox 360, even on iOS, that I'll be honest, I am sick and tired of the Green Hill theme and I can't stand it anymore. Not because it's a bad composition, but because I've had it drilled into my head that much. Because I've played this game that much. And that's some terrific staying power, if that's the first thing I'm mentioning here. I can't look at Sonic 1 without immediately thinking of the soundtrack and its staying power. To be fair though, not everything is great here if we're immediately diving into the soundtrack. I mean, look at Labyrinth Zone. I find that theme annoying, but then again, also look at the boss theme, which I think is one of the best boss themes in any video game ever. But we may be getting a little ahead of ourselves. The premise of Sonic the Hedgehog is simple. The evil Dr. Robotnik, known in Japan and later retconned in the West as Dr. Eggman, is evil and turning animals into robots. So it's up to you as Sonic the Hedgehog to save South Island and collect the mystical Chaos Emeralds, and that's pretty much it. It's a simple 2D platformer plot for a simple 2D platformer. Except things are a bit more complex. 2D platformers to this point had been experimenting with momentum. If you've ever played Super Mario Bros., you know that you don't stop on a dime, but rather, if you try to stop Mario while he's running, he may skid for a little bit. Sonic takes us to a whole new level. Momentum-based platforming is the name of the game here. You move around using the D-pad and you have one button. You either use the jump or you press down while going down a slope to curl into a ball. Sonic's iconic spin dash ability was not introduced until Sonic 2, so literally you're just rolling and jumping here. However, to say that's all you're doing really is a disservice to Sonic. Let's take a look at Green Hill Zone again, a zone that I think is one of the best starting levels in any video games ever. And it's here that one of the key tenets of Sonic is put into place, and that's flow. Many people wrongly think that Sonic the Hedgehog at its best is a game about speed, but I'd argue that Sonic isn't about speed so much as it's about level design that creates a sense of flow that is so fluid when you're good at it that it feels like you're going fast. I mean, yes, obviously it's a game that's very speed runnable and whatnot, but Sonic wasn't going 300 miles an hour in his first adventure. He was going quite a bit slower than he would in, say, Sonic Unleashed. But you still felt like you were going fast. I mean, just look at these sections in Starlight Zone where you're going through these loops. But then I think we get to the main problem of Sonic 1. Green Hill Zone is so good, it teaches you about the game. From the outset, oh, I see this ring box. What happens if I jump on it? Oh, it gives me that. Oh, what? I lost rings? What are these rings? Oh, that's my health bar. If I have these rings, then I won't die if I get hit by an enemy. But, you know, pits will kill me, as will spikes, which were glitchy here. And while that's great and all, then we get to Marble Zone, and I see why I hated it as a kid. The issue with Marble Zone is that it takes that idea of flow, and it throws it out the window. It feels like whoever designed Green Hill Zone was not the same person or same people who designed Marble Zone. Marble Zone is a much slower zone that emphasizes platforming. While there are a few sections that seem like they're hinting at an attempt at flow-based platforming, there's a lot of sections where you're just waiting and you're aching to go faster, but instead you just wait. You're waiting for a platform for you to jump on. You're waiting for this platform to get pushed up by a lava chute. Hell, even Sonic himself is waiting. He's getting bored, as was I as a player. And that's the issue. It's really as simple as that. Green Hill Zone establishes that, oh, this is a game that's going to be about momentum-based platforming and flow, while Marble Zone is a very traditionally styled platforming stage. If this was not Sonic the Hedgehog, Marble Zone would actually be a very good stage. But let's be honest here. As much as I love the music from Marble Zone, and as much as I love this purple color palette here, it is not a very good Sonic Zone. But the flow does return in our next zone, Spring Yard Zone, where it's more or less kind of a casino area. Not quite in the same vein as Casino Night in Sonic 2, but you know, you see the neon lights, you see the bumpers, you see these elevator sections where you still have to wait a bit, which admittedly does break the flow. But Spring Yard Zone at points makes you feel like you're going even faster than you perhaps were in Green Hill Zone, which is great design. But it's here that I feel I should mention two of the other things here. The boss here requires a bit of waiting, but the Spring Yard Zone boss never really annoyed me, and that's something I can say I enjoy about all the bosses in Sonic 1. They're all very simple, and while they're waiting games, they feel more tense than anything else. It doesn't feel like the game is trying to make you spend more time on it just for the sake of making you spend more time on it, but rather it feels like an actual test of skill, even if the bosses themselves are pretty easy. But then again, are the bosses truly easy, or am I just saying that because I've played this game tons and tons of times? I mean, let's be honest. Sure, I can say that the Green Hill Zone boss is just as pathetically easy as the final boss, but also I remember dying numerous times in that final boss as a kid. So is it really as easy as I'm giving it credit for? Another thing I would like to mention here are the Chaos Emeralds. By collecting 50 rings and getting to the end of the stage, you'll see a massive giant yellow ring, and jump into this, you get to go to these special stages, which have been dubbed by many fans as Puke Bag Zone, and I understand. If you get motion sickness, these perhaps are not for you. But with that said, I do quite enjoy the Sonic 1 special stages. I find them pretty fun, actually. Yeah, they're based on trial and error, and you know, those goal signs are really deceptive, seeing as you hit them, you actually lose the stage. But I think they're fun. I think they're a good first attempt at special stages, and I honestly do enjoy them more than, say, the Half-Pipe special stage from Sonic 2. Admittedly, getting all 6, yes, 6 to 7th Chaos Emerald and Super Sonic were also not introduced until Sonic 2. Only affects the ending slightly, but it's still a fun extra that, for some reason, I didn't find out until about a decade after I originally played Sonic 1. Moving on from Spring Yard Zone, we get to the game that really made me decide to make this video, Labyrinth Zone. I remember at many points when I was a teenager when I'd go back and play Sonic 1, whenever I get to Labyrinth Zone, I'd actually turn off the console and use the stage select code, which is displayed right here by the way, so I could skip it. I really despise this zone. It's the token water level here, and it's even worse than Marble Zone as far as flow goes. Sonic is a game based around flow and speed, and well, Labyrinth Zone has none of that. Sonic is extremely sluggish underwater, and he needs to collect these air bubbles so he won't drown. Yes, that's right, Sonic, fastest thing alive, never learned to swim. And while that's fine in concept, he moves so sluggishly here that it's just a drag, and the stage honestly goes on longer than I would like. With that said, I don't feel like Labyrinth Zone itself is actually longer than any of the other zones in the game, but it certainly feels like it. Something as simple as being hit and losing your rings feels like it takes an eternity, and it's just, well, not fun. Perhaps the most egregious part of Labyrinth Zone, though, has nothing to do with the actual zone itself, but rather the boss at the end. Instead of fighting Robotnik as you usually would, you instead go through an obstacle course. This is terrible. I didn't count this when I mentioned boss fights earlier because it's not a boss fight. It's just you trying to escape the stage without drowning or being killed, and if you lose your rings here, then consider yourself dead. This is also a stage where I believe many learn that Sonic the Hedgehog is a game where if you use up all your lives and continues, it's back to the title screen in Green Hill Zone. And Labyrinth Zone is the one point in the game where I lost all of them. Well, that and Scrap Brain Zone, but we'll get to that in a bit. The Labyrinth Zone boss, if you would even call it a boss, is perhaps one of the worst boss encounters in the Sonic series, and I legitimately think that if you play through this zone and you haven't ever played through it before, you're legitimately going to have a bad time. Things do pick up again after Labyrinth Zone. Starlight Zone is not perfect, but has loops, and has this beautiful starlight background, which I guess makes sense seeing the name. It has this cool fan gimmick. It has these annoying bombs that honestly aren't too prevalent. And it does have points where it slows down and forces you to platform that I never personally found too bad. It also has these seesaw gimmicks, which I think are put to good use. It introduces the gimmick to you at the beginning of the stage as you try to volley yourself up to higher platforms, and it brings it back for the boss encounter. That's good game design, and there's really nothing better to say about it than that. Finally, we get to the final zone of the game though, which is Scrap Brain. I'll be honest, Scrap Brain's one that's a little hard for me to talk about. When I first learned the stage select code, I remember I'd use it to always skip to Scrap Brain Zone, but it'd always be Act 1, so I'd still feel like I had to do some sort of work to reach the final boss. As you can tell, I was a weird kid. As such, I played the zone a lot. In fact, the only zone I probably played more was Green Hill Zone. I know it has its design flaws. I know people often talk of it being brutally difficult, what from the saw blades and the flames and these annoying platforms that'll escape under you, and if you're a first timer, I bet you probably will have a bad time here as well. But I don't see anything really that terrible with it. You know, I think the music's great. I love the aesthetic of it. I think the music's actually really odd and cool, and it's kind of a mechanical theme. It sounds very final in its tone. And honestly, the only part of the zone I hate is Act 3, which just brings back Labyrinth Zone. Yeah, they liked the zone so much they brought it back at the end of the game, and it's just as bad here, unless you know the easy path through, but even then it's still a bit annoying. What I'm saying is Scrap Brain Zone is a zone that's definitely very flawed. It's a very tough zone, which you'd expect for the end of the game, and I know a lot of people hate it. But I'll be honest, I don't really have tons of issues with it anymore. But then we get to the final zone, which is technically just Scrap Brain Act 4. And this boss I remember dying to a bit the first time I got to him, but well, it's pretty simple. You just wait for the electrical balls to form, and then you jump right at the right moment, and then you hit Robotnik 8 times, and then, well, he flies away. It's here that you get a pretty interesting option. Do you jump into Robotnik and, well, make his ship crash, or do you let him fly away? There's technically 4 endings here. There's the 2 main ones, you know, the 2 different ending sequences depending on whether you get all the Chaos Emeralds or not. But then there's also 2 more depending on whether or not you decide to jump into Robotnik at the end or not. All that changes is whether his ship starts crashing down into the pit below or not, but it's still cool that you're given that option. That's Sonic the Hedgehog, and it's a game I enjoyed looking at again. But before I give you my final thoughts on Sonic 1, let me just make something clear. Despite whether I say this game is still worth your time or not, know that it's still a classic, influential game. One of the beauties of hindsight and getting older and whatnot is being able to look at something you played in your childhood and see that even if it's flawed, it's still classic and still influential. I'm happy that Sonic 1 exists, even despite its flaws. The best way to play this game, shockingly enough, even better than playing on an original Genesis, on the Sega Saturn Sonic Jam Collection, on the Xbox 360 or PS4, is on your cell phone. A while back I reviewed a ROM hack of Sonic 2 called Sonic The Lost Worlds. And this is a game that was a ROM hack of Sonic 2 that tried to make Sonic 2 into the game it was originally envisioned to be, with all the cut beta levels and whatnot, though to less than stellar success. But at the end of that video we mentioned the iOS and Android ports of Sonic 2, which were done by Christian Whitehead and Simon Tomley, who are two of the minds behind the incredible Sonic Mania. However, what's also great that was done a bit before that by them was Sonic 1, the iOS and Android version. That's right, the best way to play Sonic 1 is on your phone. Along with being the 16:9 resolution, you have the choice of using the spin dash of Sonic and can also play as Tails and Knuckles. There's added features, a time attack mode, and more, and really and truly, despite what I'm going to say, if you want to play this game or if you have any nostalgia for this game, and really even, in general, if you want to just support some incredibly talented developers, definitely pick up the iOS and Android version of Sonic 1. But with that in mind, I don't think Sonic 1 is held up as great as everyone thinks it has. Sonic 1, despite being the first game I ever played, is a game that, looking back, I realized was a flawed game from a young age. It's a game that establishes a great idea for a platformer, using flow to create the illusion of high speeds, but then it breaks at several points, worst of all in Labyrinth Zone, where the game crawls almost to a halt. If you want to play any of the classic Sonic games, I wouldn't say this is the one to start with. It's a great piece of history, but in its original state, it's definitely the weakest entry there. Sonic 4 doesn't count, by the way. Honestly, if you want to start with the Sonic series, I'd say start with Sonic Mania. However, if you insist on playing a Genesis game, I'd say perhaps start with Sonic 2. However, is Sonic 1 a bad game? No. But you know what? I maybe begin to ramble on just a bit. This was more of a personal look at Sonic the Hedgehog 1. I'm hoping to do more videos like this. So with that, thank you very much for watching. If you feel so inclined, why not back us on Patreon, because every dollar earned from Patreon does go back in the channel itself. Stay classy, and I'll see you next time.